Okay, off we go. Hey guys, how's it going? John, Biddle, how's your day going so far? Early for you guys?
So far, so good. Not too early.
Biddle, what's your morning been like?
Yeah, well, I'm about 3 hours behind John, 8 hours behind you. So I'm just getting started for the day and it's pretty good. So can't complain.
Nice. It's really taken a turn in the UK for the weather. It was really sunny for like the whole of summer. We had an Indian summer, and then 2 days ago the temperatures just dropped, and now it's freezing cold and pouring with rain. So it's a bit grey outside. Always fun. All right, let's kick into it. So welcome everyone to the Keys to AWS Optimization, the show where we share stories, concepts, and solutions to help you unlock your cost optimization at AWS. My name is Stephanie Gooch, and I am a commercial architect at AWS, looking after EMEA telco customers, helping them do all things related to cloud financial management.
And I'm her co-host, Michael Biddle. I'm a commercial architect here at AWS, supporting our strategic accounts. Been here for about 8.5 years. Unofficially known as the head of savings, but another day.
Nice. And with us today is our guest and our teammate, John Massey. John, why don't you introduce yourself and give us a kind of 1-minute origin story, a bit about background about you and what you do at AWS?
Yeah, so John Massey, I'm based here in Boston, Mass. Work here on the optics team, and I also cover strategic accounts. So I guess a little bit of background on myself. I'm excited to talk about EBS and block storage today because I spent the first 10 years of my career doing storage architecture, working in the storage space, helping customers build out private clouds. So kind of have like some of that old world, experience, the way we did things, before we had AWS and kind of before we had, cloud native architectures. And I spent, kind of quite a bit of time working in the startup space that brought me over to cloud governance and orchestration, which is, obviously a really big part of cost savings and kind of running, an efficient environment. So kind of got my start there and brought all those skills and kind of brought all that background into the cost optimization space here at AWS.
Nice. Getting that hands-on stuff as a startup must have been like getting in there, getting kind of dirty as much as possible, I bet.
Yeah, and I think one of the cool parts about that was, in the startup space, we were running and maintaining our own infrastructure too. So, kind of very cost aware in the startup world with how we kind of run and maintain things on our own and make a lot of those kind of like, decisions around how do we do things maybe a little bit more lean or, best use the resources that are already available to us.
Yeah, I think startups especially are one of those worlds where, I mean, we should, if any startups want to chat to us and want to come on about how they've done, cost is especially concerning with startups because every penny counts. So that'd be an interesting topic to dive into on another day. But today we are talking about storage again, but this time we are talking about EBS Volumes specifically. So as John said, he's got a lot of experiences in this. He was my go-to guy when I first started AWS to kind of see how he was working with customers and learning all about EBS savings. So throughout, as always, please feel free to drop questions, comments in the chat. We want to hear from you. If you have anything around EBS you want to ask us or any other kind of topics that you around cost optimization, feel free to drop them in and we'll try and answer as best we can. And if you want to watch this later on, you can see it on Twitch or you can check out our YouTube channel on the Keys to AWS Optimization. So quick start, John, why don't you just explain what an EBS volume is for anybody who's not really sure what those letters mean?
Yeah, so when we're talking about EBS, we're talking about block storage, which is kind of one of the most fundamental, pervasive types of storage in the computing world. So block storage, really we're talking about taking your data and splitting it up into equal size blocks that we access just by an address. You can think about that kind of differently than we would with like object storage, where in the object storage world, we're using metadata to kind of define the access and the classification. So in the block storage space, we've got really fast, low latency access back over to that data. And you can kind of almost think about this like, a hard drive in your laptop or in your computer. We layer a file system on top of it, and we've got, a whole bunch of different parameters that kind of define what our workload is going to do. So things like the throughput and, amount of like kind of random transactions that we have that actually interact with the underlying storage itself.
Nice. And would there be kind of specific situations where you would use block over object storage?
Yeah, so when we're talking about EC2 kind of in particular, virtually all EC2 use cases are going to have block storage, attached back over to them. And that block storage is going to be what you're using for both your boot volume as well as, kind of application data, stuff like a database that you're going to have that connects back over to it.
Hey, John, that's you're also, by the way, like my go-to guy on pretty much EFS, EBS, and a lot of different things. This is a subject John is our master in. I know you got a lot of good customer wins and stories you've been a part of. Maybe want to share with us what you can on one of those successful war stories you've been a part of.
Yeah. So I think maybe to lead this off, like, cool thing that we get to do in our role is just see like the changes that customers are implementing on their own, right? So customers are realizing like all the new things that we're releasing, on the AWS side to help drive down cost. 2008 when EBS was, first announced, we had a kind of a couple different flavors for it. 2014, the first general purpose SSD drives came out. And then just at the end of last year, we announced our latest generation of general purpose SSDs, which are the GP3 volumes. So one of the things that we've seen, customers be able to do is kind of identify those like target use cases where they can, roll this out within their environment and start to realize savings. We had a really cool customer example where, very, very large environment. We're talking petabytes of data, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of volumes. And what they were able to do, was kind of look at how they were deploying EBS volumes, validate that the GP3 volumes were going to be a really good fit for them. In this case, they're actually increasing the amount of random performance they were going to get while decreasing the cost per gigabyte by about 20%. And when they rolled this out kind of across that big workload and that big fleet that they had, they were able to do that, really quick within a matter of about 6 weeks, and realized a pretty significant savings. They actually saved about 15% on average across all of their EBS capacity, taking advantage of GP3. And the neat part about this was that they increased the capacity, at the same time they were rolling this out. So they realized a net monthly savings while also being able to add in, an additional petabyte of storage at basically no additional cost.
Wow. I mean, that's what you want, isn't it? To use more and spend less is the best goal. Awesome. Okay, so let's dive into how you did that with the customer. So what were the kind of first things you did when you started to talk to them? What were the first services or tools you used to identify some areas in which you could save some money with EBS?
But really started just looking at the volumes that they had today, right? So there's kind of two ways we can identify like optimization opportunities from a performance perspective. We can use historical data that we have. So pull this from CloudWatch. We can use some of the tools that will kind of surface and bubble up that data for us. And in kind of actionable ways, things like Trusted Advisor. In this case, based on just the capacity that they had allocated per volume, we could look at that data and tell them that the switch to GP3 was going to be something that would actually give them, potential performance increases, right? So increase the upper bound of performance that they would have for these volumes. So kind of just looking at what the deployment model was, looking at how they were using the storage today, that was able to kind of get them going in the right direction. And then after obviously doing testing, you can kind of roll that out, broader scale.
Yeah. So looking at that kind of GP2, GP3 conversation, are there any kind of caveats that you've seen for people to move from the one to the two, or is it as easy as just everything move to GP3?
Yeah, so the big difference between GP3 and GP2 is that they've decoupled the performance from the capacity. So like GP2 world, that capacity or the performance would scale linearly with the capacity. So add more gigabytes, get more performance. And this is actually something that a lot of customers took advantage of in the past when they were trying to hit like a certain amount of IOPS or a certain amount of random performance, add more capacity to it to get more performance. So it's been decoupled with GP3, and they increased the amount of baseline random performance that you get, and made it so it doesn't scale, linearly with that capacity. So one thing to really pay attention to is what's the provisioned performance that you have, or the performance that you can reach with the GP2 volumes, and then compare that to what you get with the baseline on GP3. And the neat part with the GP3 is that you can add more performance as needed, but you want to definitely know what your workload actually requires so you can kind of line those up correctly.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to use my own resource here and share my blog from ages ago. This is from last year when this is reInvent. So it's almost a year ago. So 2020 reInvent, when they announced GP3, we released a blog post on how to actually identify those using your cost and usage report. So recommend kind of having a look there. Biddle, whenever you recommend this, is there anything that you make sure to look out for with customers, or again, do you just dive right in?
Well, yeah, jump on that topic here. Something that we've seen traditionally happen quite a bit with customers prior to GP3 release was you'd have scenarios where, let's say you're looking at Trusted Advisor, you get a report that says, hey, you have these underutilized EBS volumes. You find yourself in a development engineering scenario where you're saying kind of sometimes, hey, I realize I might not need as much storage as I have allocated into that volume, but I had to get, 1,000 gigabytes because I needed 3,000 IOPS, right? So they were kind of coupled together, and we realized that from our product development team. And so, like John was saying, now that they're decoupled, you get customers that are really going back at some of those old reports that they've seen where they've shown, volumes are only using half the provisioned storage. And we're going, hey, let's take that right to GP3. Let's move it over warm while it's live. We can keep the gigabytes the same, alter the provisioned IOPS and throughput, or we can look at maybe doing a bit of a strategic downtime to resize that instance and then relaunch it back as a smaller volume size while still getting the extra IOPS that you need. So it's quite a game changer. And I think, John, you talked on that, and it's a really good point we want to drive home. So, Steph, we also want to talk here in this scenario about different types of volumes besides GP3 too. And so, John, I'd love to hear anything you got on ST1, SC, hard disk back drives, any stories or, things to keep aware of when you look at those other types besides GP3.
Yeah, and I think the important part is that the volumes that we have made available, they're different, not necessarily, better or worse, right? So when we learn more about what the workload is and what kind of performance characteristics we're designing for, we can pick that best fit. So if we have a workload with a lot of random performance transactional stuff, and we want to be able to kind of pick the best disk type for that, that's where solid state drives, do really, really well. If we're talking about streaming use cases, things that are throughput intensive, magnetic disks can be great. So in like an ST1 use case, we see customers using that for use cases like Elasticsearch, or kind of a lot of data they're storing where they're kind of planning on pulling that data back out sequentially, more streaming oriented use cases.
Yeah, ditto. Okay, so we got a lot of good customers here at AWS. We love all of our children, right? But there's a really good example that stands out that we've been a part of here with Infor, big account that does, point of sale, payment processing, things like that nature, very diverse company. And well, what we looked at when we worked with Infor was they had a lot of Microsoft SQL databases that were running constant throughput. And really they had a very unique use case where they had to keep a lot of backups for that. And so we looked at some of the hard disk backed options, and what we landed on was moving these backup SQL databases to ST1, which is saving them about 75% per month. And it's actually allowing them to do their backups in about 30% less time. And the reason being is, when you look at some of these hard disk backed options, which aren't going to necessarily work for every use case, but it really is a great opportunity when you have these database backups, and specifically around SQL intensive workloads. So, our call here really to anyone watching this show is, GP2, GP3, they're kind of like the SUV, the all-terrain vehicle of the world of EBS volumes. They can accomplish just about almost anything. But when you really want to specialize and start getting cost savings, don't forget on our hard disk back drives, especially for your database backups.
Nice, great shout out. And as we're on the subject of databases, someone has commented off the topic, well, it's not off the topic necessarily of EBS storage, but about databases. So this is a long one. So John, a bit of any feedback on this, but if I have a database that is only heavily used once a quarter, would it save us money to reduce the provisioned IOPS when the database is inactive and then increase the IOPS a week or so before the heavy use period is going to take place? Any kind of feedback or suggestions, John?
Yeah, maybe one thought on that one is, definitely a cost saving strategy, being able to, kind of change that provisioned IOPS based on what the workload is. That's a really cool part about working with provisioned IOPS volumes is that you can make adjustments to that. Works well with, I think, predictive changes or kind of seasonality. One thing just to be aware of is that there is an SLA around when that change will take place. So if it's something that's a little bit more dynamic and you don't know exactly when that burst is going to be, or it could be something that's unpredictable, just kind of be aware of that. And there may be better strategies for reducing costs that kind of preserve that level of performance for those unexpected scenarios. But if it's something that's more seasonal, definitely worth kind of calculating out what the savings potential is there, and looking a little bit more closely at it.
Nice. Bill, anything else? Or?
John, we're on the same page here. No, exactly. I agree. And I would even say that, when you're in that scenario where you're looking at heavily used once a quarter, look at when you say it's heavily used at the end of the quarter, maybe, and it's not used between those times. Like, could we even look at doing a pause on this database at some point in time, before you start changing the volume? So maybe another suggestion is to look at the pattern of access or read writes into that database and see if there's a time period where maybe you can steal 7 days here or there where you're pausing it or shutting it down to maximize your savings.
Nice. And I mean, that's what I was going to suggest. And I've just popped in the chat the instant scheduler. So really recommend, if you are looking for some kind of automation, to turning that off. If you know on the last week of the month it's going to be, you need it on, then turn it on and kind of set those timeframes. But great question. And as always, everybody, please feel free to pop in some questions in the chat. Let us know what you're using EBS for. Or if you had any great savings, it's always good to shout out and show off what you've been doing. So bringing it back to the EBS, I wanted to touch on something I think John mentioned about migrating from kind of one, like GP2 to GP3 or IO1 to GP3 or whatever you want to do, about warm, like moving it when it's warm. I wondered if you wanted to go into detail about what that actually means and why it's so useful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we talked about kind of a couple different ways that, folks are leveraging different volume types. One of them could be that, when you're redeploying your application, you make a change to whatever that infrastructure as code template is so that you're leveraging the new disk type going forward. But the other option that we have is going through and using elastic volumes to do that change on the fly non-disruptively. So this is, a really, really powerful way to try out new disk types, or when we identify some of those use cases, do it without kind of turning my application off. So we've got some of those apps that have been around for a while, performance requirements have changed. We can do that as a non-disruptive cutover on the volume types. I think one really kind of cool call out there too is that Compute Optimizer is a tool that will look at the utilization of your volumes and give you recommendations on lower cost options. And this could be anything from reducing the amount of provisioned IOPS to using different disk types. So it's a cool way to kind of identify those target opportunities and then take advantage of the elastic volumes to do the cutover without shutting down your app or having to go through and deal with a disruption.
Yeah, definitely. And the Compute Optimizer, I popped a link down as always, but check that out. You've got to go in and turn it off. We've done some other sessions on Compute Optimizer as well, one with Bryce, and I recommend checking that out to see a bit more. But EBS kind of having a service that tells you which instances or EBS volumes to actually make smaller, I think I always like that about Amazon. I think is a valid, like a useful thing to give us. And if you want to kind of look at that data regularly, I recommend there's a AWS lab, which I'll post in a second, which you can collect that information regularly. So if you're not sure if maybe it just wasn't really utilized, like the person was saying earlier, that a month is more informative than just 2 weeks, which is the current review for Compute Optimizer. Gathering that data over maybe a couple of months to make sure that when you make a change, it isn't going to have a negative impact is a really kind of good way of doing it. So they've got about 10 minutes left. So let's talk a little bit about if there are any mechanisms and trends that you guys have seen in the industry that people have started to think about when they come to choosing the types of EBS volumes that they want to use in that kind of cost-aware way.
Yeah, I'll just kind of double down real quick on the Compute Optimizer piece towards your
Sure.
question of trends. One trend that, yes, we are seeing, and I love to see with my customers is, backing up the Compute Optimizer results into S3, like have an export job that dumps those every 2 weeks to a bucket of your choice. Then, you can kind of work around maybe some of the limitations of how how long the look back period is. So Steph, you hit on it, but I just want to really dive into that just a second, that you can easily move these over to S3 and access them and move them over to something like Quick Sites and look at the performance over time. And it's our recommendation to do so.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that you started to touch on there, Biddle, is looking at that data and starting to find like the patterns and trends too. We're talking about a lot of different volume types. We're talking about different workloads, different patterns. One of the cool parts about all of this is that I can have an EC2 instance that's running a couple different services on it, and each one of those might have kind of different performance requirements. So sometimes looking at the trends kind of across your EC2 instances, across your apps, you can find that, hey, maybe I provisioned all one instance, one volume type kind of for all the attached drives on all these instances that I have running a whole bunch of different workloads. Now, when I look through a compute optimizer, I find out that, there's one particular volume on every one of those instances that has different performance requirements. And I can pick the volume or the volume type that's going to be the best fit for that actual workload. Like, good example of that might be like I'm collecting logs on a particular host, and I've got databases that are running on it too. Maybe I don't need the same performance characteristics for each one of those. And same thing for the boot volume. We've seen customers that have kind of really big environments out there, and they can start with boot volumes as an option for doing cost optimization, because those are going to have a more predictable performance profile than customer public facing database that could be more bursty or kind of have more variability to it over time. So compute optimizer lets you kind of spot those trends when you look across big fleets of your environment and start to find some of those patterns and break them out and kind of get to that more granular optimization path.
Nice.
Yeah, definitely. You talk about trends. One thing we haven't really hit on yet today is EBS snapshots as part of these considerations. I'll give you an example. One of the customers I work with, really big into gaming development, and it's an interesting use case where you can have content that really, blast it through the download charts, and is really popular for like a 6-week period, and then after that, you see a drop off once content kind of isn't as fresh. And that can be very hard when you're having to manage environments where you need to keep like chat room data, user profile data, and stuff that's for online gaming. And you need to keep it active in some capacity in case that user does come back to the game, maybe a year later. And so one thing that we're really wanting to stress, and we work with in our engagements, is what is your EBS, your lifecycle policy for these snapshots? Are you doing just incremental snapshots? Like, what does that really look like? And so the point being here, I want to drive home is, this is kind of an unofficial stat, but we typically see that customers that have roughly maybe 10% or more of their EBS spend be attributed to snapshots, usually more often than not lends opportunity to further refine optimizing those. So that's our shout out here on the trends. If you're an admin managing your environment and you see in your EBS spend that over 10% of your EBS bill is on snapshots, then go ahead and hit up your AWS account team and let's set up something where we can dive into that with you.
Yeah. Two things. One, did you just use the gaming example because we're on Twitch? That was just to the many fans, in case any gamers accidentally come onto this channel. Be like, yeah, we know about gaming too. That was one. And then secondly, snapshots. I think we discussed this before we got into this call, if we should bring a lot of snapshot conversation into it. And we realized that snapshots is a whole other kind of kettle of fish. So next season, we'll be trying to do a snapshot episode. And also, if you have any kind of suggestions or recommendations of episodes going forward, or want to come on the show, feel free to email us at costoptimization@amazon.com. So with the last 5 minutes, I wondered if you guys have got any really, if you've got any other specific stories that you wanted to share with customers, or kind of, it'd be good if we had a couple of like finite things people could take away and go and try and check out as soon as they kind of finish this call. What would you start them off with, John?
Yeah, we talked a little bit at the beginning about Trusted Advisor, and what's cool about Trusted Advisor is that it looks at utilization data on the back end and kind of finds these patterns and groups and flags resources you have in your environment. So you're not looking at those individual metrics across, a lot of different volumes. And what it'll allow you to do is find any volumes that you have out there that are averaging less than 1 IO per second over the trailing 7 days. So one of the things that we like to have customers do is kind of a starting exercise is just pull that list and look across the volumes you have that meet that criteria. And what's really helpful for a lot of customers is to then kind of click in a little bit deeper and kind of figure out why. So are those volumes, kind of not getting any IO right now because they're on a powered off instance, but the data needs to be persistent? Trusted Advisor will let you exclude those volumes kind of based on that use case. Or are these volumes that are unattached? We'll find, kind of oddball scenarios or kind of those one-offs where someone accidentally provisioned something in the wrong region, forgot about it, they went through and kind of provisioned it in the correct region after, and you kind of get left with this artifact. Or the other scenario that Trusted Advisor is great at flagging is if you have a kind of a zombie volume where it's the volume that's attached over to an instance, but there's no IO on it. So it's not formatted, or sometimes we've seen folks kind of have a change in the workload where now that like staging space is being offloaded to another managed service, something like that instead. So being able to break out those patterns, look at the Trusted Advisor output is a great way where we see customers save money with that every single day. It's awesome.
Yeah, I love the idea of zombie volumes. I feel like I'm going to start using that as a reference in my presentations to customers. That definitely is. I mean, when I was a developer, that was a really common situation where we had, because we had so many accounts, because we had every project had like 3 accounts for different development environments. That stuff might have been built exactly as you said in the wrong region by accident, or stuff was made manually. Oh, the worst thing. And it meant that stuff was just left idle, and then it just burns money. Especially the worst cases are those ones where they haven't even been used. It's not like it's something that's been abandoned. It's just something that was spun up and then totally forgotten about. So yeah, Trusted Advisor is a great kind of service that's available just to kickstart that search into it. And it is so satisfying when you delete them, because you see that bill just drop down. Biddle, what about you? Any kind of really useful tips that you recommend people take away for today?
I got a tip. It actually kind of relates to Anise Wick's question here in the chat. I'll read it out loud. It says, during the on-premise days when we wanted to increase throughput, we opted for more disks. Now we can't. Is increasing IOPS essentially the same as more disks? And so in a way, I guess, yes and no, right? IOPS meaning that's effectively the speed you can have in-out operations right to that disk. And so if by saying you need more disks, your need was to have an increased allotment of storage capacity, IOPS probably won't really help you there with that. However, if your need for quote unquote more disks is because you needed to increase the speed of, writing in-out operations to the disk, then effectively IOPS would help solve for that. So that's what, like John was saying earlier with GP3, how we can customize the ratio of, IOPS and throughput to the gigabyte level. It really allows you to kind of hit on that scenario. So if speed of write is your issue, yes, IOPS will help you. If the capacity for storage is the issue, you will need to increase the capacity instead.
Nice. Thank you for the question. And the other one as well, Steph, are you doing an RI show, which leads me on to next week. We're actually doing a show on savings plans, not RIs, I'm afraid, but check that out. Biddle and Alex are doing it without me. Heartbreaking. I know you'll all miss me for a week, but they're doing a show on savings plans next week. So feel free to check that out. If you're interested in RI one, we will also put that on the schedule for later. Awesome. Okay, last 2 minutes. I feel like I should share an exciting story. Do you know what? I'm going to share a link that we saw. Oh, I've got to find it now. There was a new release for a config rule to help you resize, and I now can't find it in my notes, which is very annoying. So if there are have you guys got any more tips or fun stories that you've seen in the last couple of, I found it. Just while I do it, because I feel like it was good. I saw a new blog posted that uses a config rule to help you resize your EBS volume. So just something to check out today. I'll stick it up on the channel. But yeah, that's all I've got. Any other things in the last minute before we finish up?
Check out that blog post. Pretty sweet. I mean, if you want to get the granular view instead of a bunch of folks like us hacking around here on Twitch telling you what to do, just go check out the blog post. But I think as a call to action here, like we always say, cost optimization is a journey. You're going to keep doing it over and over again. So first step here, like John said, look at Trusted Advisor, see if you got any low-hanging fruit we can hit at. If you're not using Compute Optimizer to at least get those insights, let's get that enabled. If you can do that, you're in pretty good shape to start making the decisions what you want to do moving forward. So take that as your first activity here.
Nice. John, anything else?
No, I think that's it. I mean, one of the other great places to look is just looking at the sheets that lay out, the performance characteristics for each one of the EBS volumes. There's a couple great reInvent talks too. So if you want to dive into this a little bit more, I recommend checking out some of the cost optimization reInvent talks that we've had in the past year or two. So those are great resources.
Nice. Okay, thanks for joining me, guys. Next week's savings plan, check it out, and I'll see you guys in 2 weeks. See you later.